The morning sunshine filtered through the kitchen blinds as Tom sipped his coffee, gazing out the window at the familiar sight that made his blood boil. There it was again, a sleek, blue sedan parked in his driveway, exactly where it shouldn't be. This had been happening for weeks now, and Tom's patience was wearing dangerously thin. Tom was a simple man. At 58, he'd spent most of his life working hard as a carpenter, saving every penny to buy this modest two-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. His home wasn't fancy, but it was his. After his wife passed away 3 years ago, the house became his sanctuary, and he protected it fiercely. The problem started when new tenants moved into the apartment complex next door. The building had limited parking spots, and apparently, someone decided Tom's driveway was a convenient overflow area. At first, he thought it was a one-time mistake. Then it happened again. And again. And again. Unbelievable, Tom muttered, setting his coffee mug down with a thud. He grabbed his coat and headed outside, determined to catch the driver in action this time. But as usual, the car was empty. The owner had already disappeared, probably rushing off to work after casually blocking Tom's driveway as if it were a public parking lot. He checked his watch, 7:45 a.m. He had a doctor's appointment at 8:30, and now he'd have to wait for the owner to return before he could get his own car out. Tom pulled out his phone and took several pictures of the vehicle from different angles, making sure to capture the license plate clearly. This was the 5th time this month, and he was done playing nice. He dialed the non-emergency police number he now knew by heart. "Hello, I'd like to report a car repeatedly blocking my driveway," Tom explained when the operator answered. "Yes, it's happened multiple times." "No, I don't know who it belongs to." The operator assured him someone would come by, but Tom knew the drill by now. By the time an officer arrived, the car would likely be gone, and the cycle would repeat tomorrow. While waiting, Tom walked around the apartment building, scanning the directory for any clues. The complex had 16 units, and he had no idea which one housed the inconsiderate driver. He'd left notes on the windshield before, polite at first, then increasingly stern, but they'd been ignored. An hour later, Tom watched as a young woman rushed out of the apartment building, clicking her key fob. The blue sedan's lights flashed in response. She seemed to be in her early 30s, dressed in business casual attire, completely oblivious to Tom standing nearby. "Excuse me," Tom called out, approaching her with as much composure as he could muster. The woman turned, her expression shifting from surprise to mild annoyance. "Yes? Can I help you?" "That's my driveway you're parked in," Tom said, pointing to where her car sat. "This is the 5th time this month." She glanced at her watch impatiently. "Look, I'm running late." The apartment complex next door. The building had limited parking spots, and apparently, someone decided Tom's driveway was a convenient overflow area. At first, he thought it was a one-time mistake. Then it happened again. And again. And again. Unbelievable, Tom muttered, setting his coffee mug down with a thud. He grabbed his coat and headed outside, determined to catch the driver in action this time. But as usual, the car was empty. The owner had already disappeared, probably rushing off to work after casually blocking Tom's driveway as if it were a public parking lot. He checked his watch, 7:45 a.m. He had a doctor's appointment at 8:30, and now he'd have to wait for the owner to return before he could get his own car out. Tom pulled out his phone and took several pictures of the vehicle from different angles, making sure to capture the license plate clearly. This was the 5th time this month, and he was done playing nice. He dialed the non-emergency police number he now knew by heart. "Hello, I'd like to report a car repeatedly blocking my driveway," Tom explained when the operator answered. "Yes, it's happened multiple times." "No, I don't know who it belongs to." The operator assured him someone would come by, but Tom knew the drill by now. By the time an officer arrived, the car would likely be gone, and the cycle would repeat tomorrow. While waiting, Tom walked around the apartment building, scanning the directory for any clues. The complex had 16 units, and he had no idea which one housed the inconsiderate driver. He'd left notes on the windshield before, polite at first, then increasingly stern, but they'd been ignored. An hour later, Tom watched as a young woman rushed out of the apartment building, clicking her key fob. The blue sedan's lights flashed in response. She seemed to be in her early 30s, dressed in business casual attire, completely oblivious to Tom standing nearby. "Excuse me," Tom called out, approaching her with as much composure as he could muster. The woman turned, her expression shifting from surprise to mild annoyance. "Yes? Can I help you?" "That's my driveway you're parked in," Tom said, pointing to where her car sat. "This is the 5th time this month." She glanced at her watch impatiently. "Look, I'm running late. The apartment parking is full, and it's just for a few hours during the day when you're probably not even using it." Tom felt his face grow hot. "I had a doctor's appointment this morning. I've missed it now because I couldn't get my car out." She sighed dramatically. "I'm sorry about that, but the street parking is 3 blocks away, and I can't walk that far in these heels every day. Besides, it's not like your driveway is being used." Before Tom could respond, she had slipped into her car and started the engine. He stood there, dumbfounded by her entitled attitude, as she backed out and drove away with a small wave that felt more dismissive than apologetic. The police officer arrived 20 minutes after she left. "Sorry, sir," the young officer said after hearing Tom's story. "Since the vehicle isn't here now, there's not much I can do. If it happens again, call immediately, and we'll try to get here while the car is still present." Tom nodded, though he knew this wouldn't solve his problem. The officer handed him a pamphlet about parking violations and suggested he put up a "no parking" sign, as if that would deter someone who already knew they were parking on private property. That night, Tom couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, replaying the woman's dismissive attitude in his mind. "It's not like your driveway is being used," she had said. The comment stung more than she could know. What she didn't understand was that Tom's quiet life had a rhythm. Some days he didn't leave the house at all, finding comfort in puttering around his workshop in the garage. Other days, like today, he had appointments or errands. But it was his choice when to use his driveway, not hers. The next morning, Tom sat by the window earlier than usual, waiting. Sure enough, at 7:30 a.m., the blue sedan appeared. This time, he was ready. He grabbed his jacket and rushed outside, managing to approach just as she was locking her car. "We need to talk," Tom said firmly. The woman jumped slightly, then composed herself. "Look, I know you're upset, but I'm already late for work." "That's not my problem," Tom replied, standing his ground. "This is private property. You can't park here." She adjusted her bag on her shoulder. "I understand it's annoying, but it's really not hurting anyone. The apartment management won't do anything about the parking situation, and I need to get to work on time." "So do other people," Tom countered. "Yesterday I missed a doctor's appointment because of you." "I said I was sorry about that," she replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But realistically, how often do you actually need to use your driveway? You're retired, right?" Tom felt a surge of indignation. "That's not the point. This is my property." "Fine," she said, holding up her hands in surrender. "I'll try to find somewhere else. But if there's absolutely nowhere to park, I might need to use it occasionally. I hope you can understand." Without waiting for his response, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the pavement. Tom stood in his driveway, fuming. She hadn't understood at all. In fact, her half-hearted promise made it clear she had every intention of continuing to use his driveway whenever it was convenient for her. As he walked back into his house, Tom knew the problem wouldn't solve itself. The police were no help. Talking hadn't worked. He needed to take matters into his own hands, to teach her a lesson she wouldn't forget. That night, Tom sat at his kitchen table with a notepad, sketching out ideas. He wasn't a vindictive man by nature, but sometimes people needed to learn the hard way. He thought about what his father used to say, "Respect isn't given, it's earned or learned." By midnight, Tom had a plan. It wouldn't be cruel or illegal, but it would definitely make his point. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, she would learn that actions have consequences. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Tom felt a mixture of anticipation and resolve. The battle for his driveway had just begun. Tom woke up the next morning with renewed determination. After a quick breakfast, he headed straight to his garage where he kept his tools and supplies. The garage had been his sanctuary since retirement, a place where he could work with his hands and forget his troubles. Today, however, it would serve a different purpose. He rummaged through old boxes until he found what he needed, a set of heavy-duty tire boots he'd purchased years ago when he briefly worked as a building superintendent. They were gathering dust now, but they were about to become very useful. Next, Tom pulled out his phone and made a call to an old friend who worked at a local printing shop. "Hey, Jim, I need a favor," Tom explained. "Can you make me a sign? Something waterproof and professional looking." He described exactly what he wanted, and Jim agreed to have it ready by noon. Tom spent the morning cleaning the tire boots and checking that the locking mechanisms still worked properly. By 11:30, he was driving to the print shop, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When he returned home, Tom had everything he needed. He hammered a sturdy post into the ground at the entrance of his driveway and attached the new sign, "Private Property. Unauthorized vehicles will be booted. $150 removal fee. Call 555-0178. The sign was big and impossible to miss, with bold red letters on a white background. Tom had even added his old security company's logo to make it look more official. The phone number listed was his own cell phone. With the sign in place, Tom placed the tire boot in a discreet corner of his front porch, hidden but easily accessible. Now, all he had to do was wait. The next morning came, and to Tom's surprise, there was no blue sedan in his driveway. He peeked through the blinds several times, expecting to see the now familiar car, but it never appeared. Maybe the sign worked after all, he muttered to himself, feeling both relieved and strangely disappointed. He'd been ready for a confrontation. But his satisfaction was premature. The day after that, Tom was awakened by the sound of a car engine. He glanced at his bedside clock, 6:45 a.m., earlier than usual. He hurried to the window just in time to see the blue sedan backing into his driveway. From his vantage point, Tom could see the woman glance at the sign, hesitate for a moment, then seemingly dismiss it as she parked anyway. She even appeared to smirk as she grabbed her bag and hurried off. "Perfect," Tom whispered. He waited until she was completely out of sight before springing into action. He thought about what his father used to say, "Respect isn't given, it's earned or learned." By midnight, Tom had a plan. It wouldn't be cruel or illegal, but it would definitely make his point. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, she would learn that actions have consequences. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Tom felt a mixture of anticipation and resolve. The battle for his driveway had just begun. Tom woke up the next morning with renewed determination. After a quick breakfast, he headed straight to his garage where he kept his tools and supplies. The garage had been his sanctuary since retirement, a place where he could work with his hands and forget his troubles. Today, however, it would serve a different purpose. He rummaged through old boxes until he found what he needed, a set of heavy-duty tire boots he'd purchased years ago when he briefly worked as a building superintendent. They were gathering dust now, but they were about to become very useful. Next, Tom pulled out his phone and made a call to an old friend who worked at a local printing shop. "Hey, Jim, I need a favor," Tom explained. "Can you make me a sign? Something waterproof and professional looking." He described exactly what he wanted, and Jim agreed to have it ready by noon. Tom spent the morning cleaning the tire boots and checking that the locking mechanisms still worked properly. By 11:30, he was driving to the print shop, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When he returned home, Tom had everything he needed. He hammered a sturdy post into the ground at the entrance of his driveway and attached the new sign, "Private Property. Unauthorized vehicles will be booted. $150 removal fee. Call 555-0178. The sign was big and impossible to miss, with bold red letters on a white background. Tom had even added his old security company's logo to make it look more official. The phone number listed was his own cell phone. With the sign in place, Tom placed the tire boot in a discreet corner of his front porch, hidden but easily accessible. Now, all he had to do was wait. The next morning came, and to Tom's surprise, there was no blue sedan in his driveway. He peeked through the blinds several times, expecting to see the now familiar car, but it never appeared. Maybe the sign worked after all, he muttered to himself, feeling both relieved and strangely disappointed. He'd been ready for a confrontation. But his satisfaction was premature. The day after that, Tom was awakened by the sound of a car engine. He glanced at his bedside clock, 6:45 a.m., earlier than usual. He hurried to the window just in time to see the blue sedan backing into his driveway. From his vantage point, Tom could see the woman glance at the sign, hesitate for a moment, then seemingly dismiss it as she parked anyway. She even appeared to smirk as she grabbed her bag and hurried off. "Perfect," Tom whispered. He waited until she was completely out of sight before springing into action. With practiced movements, Tom retrieved the tire boot from his porch and approached the blue sedan. His hands were steady as he secured the device to the front wheel of her car. The heavy metal clamp locked into place with a satisfying click. Once the boot was secure, Tom took several photos of the car with the boot clearly visible, making sure to capture the license plate and the warning sign in the background. Then he went back inside to wait. The confrontation came sooner than expected. At 1:30 p.m., Tom's phone rang. "Hello?" he answered calmly, though his heart was racing. "Someone put a boot on my car." The woman's voice was high-pitched with anger. "Is this the number to get it removed?" "Yes, it is," Tom replied evenly. "That would be the car parked illegally in my private driveway, correct?" There was a pause, then, "Wait, is this you? The old man next door?" Tom ignored the bold man comment. "I did warn you about parking in my driveway. The sign clearly states the consequences." "You can't do this," she sputtered. This is illegal." "Actually," Tom countered, "parking on private property without permission is illegal. I've documented multiple instances of your trespassing, spoken to you directly about it twice, and posted clear signage. The law is on my side." The woman fell silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted from outrage to negotiation. "Look, I need my car. I have appointments this afternoon. Can we work something out?" Tom had prepared for this moment. "The removal fee is $150, as stated on the sign." "That's ridiculous. I'm not paying that." "Then I'm afraid your car will remain exactly where it is," Tom replied. "And if it's still there tomorrow, the daily storage fee kicks in." The line went quiet again. Tom could almost hear her weighing her options. "Fine," she finally said through gritted teeth. "I'll pay. But this isn't over." Tom smiled to himself. She was right about one thing, this wasn't over. But the first lesson had been delivered. An hour after their phone conversation, Tom watched from his living room window as the woman stormed up his front path. Her face was flushed with anger, and she clutched an envelope in her hand. She pounded on his door with enough force to rattle the hinges. Tom took a deep breath before opening the door. He'd expected this confrontation and had prepared himself to remain calm. "Here's your money," she snapped, thrusting the envelope at him without making eye contact. Tom counted the cash, exactly $150. "Thank you," he said politely. "I'll remove the boot right now." As he walked toward her car, she followed close behind, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "You know this is completely unreasonable, right?" she said. "I'm only using a tiny bit of space that you're not even using most of the time." Tom knelt beside the car and started unlocking the boot. "It's not about the space," he replied. "It's about respect and property rights. How would you feel if I decided to use your apartment whenever you weren't home?" She scoffed. "That's not the same thing at all." "It's exactly the same," Tom countered, removing the boot with practiced hands. "You don't get to decide how and when I use my property." As he stood up, he noticed a small crowd had gathered. A couple of residents from the apartment building were watching the scene unfold, whispering to each other. The woman noticed them too and her cheeks reddened further. "This isn't over," she hissed quietly as she yanked open her car door. "I hope it is," Tom replied. "There's plenty of legal parking just down the street." She peeled out of his driveway with a screech of tires, causing one of the onlookers to jump back. An older woman from the crowd approached Tom afterward. "That was Linda from Unit 12, she said. "She's been causing problems since she moved in 3 months ago. Always complaining about the parking situation but refusing to pay for a reserved spot like the rest of us." Tom introduced himself and learned the woman's name was Dorothy. She'd lived in the apartment complex for over a decade and explained that reserved parking spots were available for an extra $50 monthly fee. "Linda thinks she's too special to pay," Dorothy explained with a shake of her head. "She's parked in the fire lane, in handicapped spots, and now in your driveway." Tom thanked Dorothy for the information. As they chatted, he realized this conflict wasn't just about him. Linda had been taking advantage of everyone. That evening, Tom received an unexpected email from the apartment complex management. The subject line read, "Complaint against your booting activities." The email was coldly professional. "We've received a complaint from one of our residents regarding your unauthorized parking enforcement activities. Please cease and desist immediately or we will be forced to take legal action." Tom stared at the screen in disbelief. Linda had escalated the situation, painting herself as the victim. He deleted the email without responding, his jaw clenched tight. If she wanted to play this game, he would need to be smarter about his next move. The following morning, Tom's driveway remained empty. He felt a small sense of victory but knew better than to think the problem was solved. This was just the calm before the storm. Tom spent that afternoon researching property laws. He printed out local ordinances regarding trespassing and private property rights, highlighting the relevant sections. If the apartment management wanted to threaten legal action, he would be prepared. He also installed a small security camera under his porch eave, angled perfectly to capture his driveway. The camera connected to his phone, allowing him to monitor the situation even when he wasn't home. 2 peaceful days passed. Tom began to hope that Linda had finally gotten the message. But on the 3rd morning, his phone buzzed with a notification from the security camera. It was 5:30 a.m., still dark outside. Tom tapped the alert and watched in disbelief as Linda's blue sedan crept slowly into his driveway, headlights off. She parked, then quickly walked away, looking over her shoulder nervously. "So that's how she wants to play it," Tom muttered. Rather than confronting her immediately, he decided to document this new development. He saved the video footage, then took fresh photos of her car in his driveway with timestamp evidence. This time, he'd handle things differently. Instead of using the boot again, Tom called the official towing company listed in the city ordinance. Within 30 minutes, a tow truck arrived. "You have all the proper documentation?" the driver asked, glancing at the car. Tom handed over the photos showing repeated incidents, copies of the warning sign, and proof of property ownership. "More than enough." The driver nodded. "This is clearly unauthorized parking on private property. We'll take it to our impound lot. The owner will need to pay the towing fee and daily storage to get it back." Tom watched with satisfaction as the tow truck operator efficiently hooked up Linda's car and drove away. He placed a simple note on the ground where her car had been, "Vehicle towed for unauthorized parking. Contact City Impound at 555-2800. Later that morning, Tom received a furious call from Linda. "You had my car towed," she screamed without even saying hello. "Do you know how much they're charging me?" "I believe the standard rate is $175 for the tow, plus $50 per day for storage," Tom replied calmly. "That's the legal remedy for unauthorized parking on private property. I'm going to sue you for this," Linda threatened. "I've already talked to a lawyer." "Feel free," Tom answered. "I have video of you sneaking onto my property at 5:30 this morning with your headlights off. That shows clear intent. I also have documentation of all previous incidents. But good luck with your case." The line went quiet. "The apartment management sent me a threatening email," Tom continued. "I'm guessing that was your doing. I've prepared a response with copies of the city ordinances and all my evidence. Should I send it to them, or would you prefer to explain the situation yourself?" Linda's anger seemed to deflate. "This is ridiculous. I just needed a place to park." "That's not my problem," Tom replied. "The apartment complex has reserved spaces available. Your neighbor Dorothy told me all about it." "Dorothy should mind her own business," Linda muttered. "So should you," Tom answered. "Stay off my property." He ended the call and sat down heavily in his armchair. The confrontation had left him drained, but he felt vindicated. Sometimes, you had to stand your ground. That evening, Dorothy came by with a plate of cookies to thank him. "You've done what none of us had the courage to do," she said with a smile. "Stand up to her." The next week passed without incident. Tom's driveway remained blissfully empty of any unauthorized vehicles. Each morning, he checked his security camera footage, half expecting to see Linda's blue sedan, but it never appeared. He began to relax, thinking perhaps the towing had finally driven the point home. One evening, Tom was enjoying a quiet dinner when his doorbell rang. He opened the door to find a man in a suit standing on his porch. The stranger had slicked back hair and carried an expensive-looking leather briefcase. "Good evening," the man said with a practiced smile. "My name is Alan Brooks. I represent the Oakwood apartment complex." He handed Tom a business card identifying him as the property manager. Tom invited him in reluctantly, clearing newspapers from a chair so the man could sit down. "Mr. Campbell, we have a situation that needs resolution," Brooks began, opening his briefcase. "One of our residents, Ms. Linda Patterson, has filed multiple complaints about your enforcement activities regarding your driveway." Tom folded his arms. "My completely legal enforcement of my private property rights, you mean?" Brooks nodded slightly. "Yes, well, she feels harassed. The apartment complex would like to avoid any further unpleasantness. I've come to propose a solution." He pulled out a document and slid it across the coffee table. "This is an offer to lease your driveway for resident overflow parking during business hours, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday through Friday. We're prepared to pay $200 monthly." Tom stared at the paper, surprised by this turn of events. "So instead of telling Linda to stop trespassing, you want to rent my driveway from me?" "We value all our residents, Mr. Campbell," Brooks replied smoothly. And we believe this could be mutually beneficial. You'd receive steady income for space you rarely use during those hours. Tom picked up the document, scanning it briefly before setting it down again. And if I refuse? Brooks' smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, Ms. Patterson has threatened legal action for emotional distress and the illegal booting of her vehicle. While we don't wish to take sides, as her landlord, we may need to provide her with legal support. That sounds like a threat, Tom said quietly. Not at all, Brooks countered. Just outlining the potential complications if we can't reach an amicable agreement. Property disputes can be messy. Tom sat back in his chair, studying the man across from him. It was clear the apartment complex was trying to intimidate him rather than deal with their difficult tenant. Mr. Brooks, Tom said finally, I appreciate your visit, but I'm not interested in leasing my driveway. It's my property, and I'll use it as I see fit. The property manager's smile disappeared completely. I strongly urge you to reconsider. The legal fees alone could. I have video evidence of Linda trespassing multiple times, Tom interrupted. I have documentation of her admitting she knew she was parking illegally. I've followed every legal procedure for dealing with unauthorized parking. If you want to support her lawsuit, go ahead. But I think you should know I've already spoken with my own attorney. This was a bluff. Tom hadn't actually consulted a lawyer, but Brooks didn't need to know that. The property manager stared at Tom for a long moment before returning the document to his briefcase. I'll relay your decision to the management company, he said stiffly as he stood to leave. After Brooks departed, Tom sat in his living room, turning over this new development in his mind. The battle had escalated beyond Linda now. He was facing off against the entire apartment complex. He picked up his phone and called Dorothy. Dorothy arrived at Tom's house the next morning, along with 3 other residents from the apartment complex. They gathered around Tom's kitchen table, sipping coffee as they shared their own stories about the parking situation. Brooks has been ignoring our complaints for months, explained Paul, an older gentleman who walked with a cane. I pay extra for a handicapped spot, but half the time, someone's parked there illegally. Management does nothing. Rena, a young mother, nodded in agreement. Last winter, I had to carry my groceries and my toddler 3 blocks because someone took my reserved spot. When I complained, Brooks just said they'd look into it. Dorothy placed a folder on the table. I've been documenting parking violations for the past year. The management company is violating city regulations by not enforcing their own parking rules. Tom was surprised by the extent of the problem. Why doesn't everyone just pay for reserved spots like you all do? Half the residents do, explained Raj, a quiet man who lived on the first floor. But the complex oversold the reserved spots. They have 25 reserved spots but sold 35 reservations. That can't be legal, Tom said, frowning. It's not, Dorothy confirmed. And that's just the beginning of their violations. As the conversation continued, a plan began to form. These residents had been individually fighting the management company without success, but together, with Tom's situation as a catalyst, they might finally get results. Later that afternoon, Tom's security camera alerted him to movement in his driveway. He checked his phone, expecting to see Linda's car, but instead found Brooks measuring the driveway width with a tape measure. Tom went outside immediately. Can I help you? Tom called out as he approached. Brooks looked up, startled. Just assessing the property line, he said, quickly rolling up his tape measure. From inside my driveway? Tom asked. This is private property, as you well know. Brooks straightened his tie. The management company is considering its options regarding the boundary dispute. There is no boundary dispute, Tom replied firmly. And you're trespassing right now. Brooks' face hardened. You've made a mistake refusing our offer, Mr. Campbell. The apartment complex has considerable resources at its disposal. So do I, Tom responded, pulling out his phone to show he was recording. Including video evidence of the property manager trespassing. Would you like to add intimidation to that charge? Brooks retreated to his car without another word, but the look he gave Tom was venomous. That evening, Tom received an email from the city zoning department requesting an inspection of his property. The reason cited was potential illegal modifications to a residential driveway without proper permits. Tom hadn't modified anything, and he knew exactly who had filed the complaint. The management company was retaliating, using their connections at the city to harass him. He forwarded the email to Dorothy, who responded within minutes. Her message was brief but encouraging. They're getting desperate. That means we're winning. Meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. with everyone. We're bringing in reinforcements. Tom smiled as he read her response. He'd started this battle alone, defending his driveway against one inconsiderate neighbor. Now he found himself leading a movement against a corrupt management company. The stakes had grown, but so had his determination, and his allies. The reinforcements Dorothy mentioned turned out to be her nephew, Jack, a local journalist who wrote for the city newspaper. He arrived at the meeting with a photographer and a keen interest in the story. Management companies cutting corners and ignoring regulations is happening all over the city, Jack explained as he interviewed the group. But it's rare to get so many residents willing to go on record. One by one, the apartment residents shared their experiences. Rena showed photos of cars blocking fire lanes. Paul described being unable to use his handicapped space. Raj presented documentation of the oversold parking permits. Dorothy provided her extensive records of unanswered complaints. And what about you? Jack asked Tom. How did you get involved in all this? Tom explained the saga with Linda's repeated parking violations, showing Jack the security footage and photos. Classic case of entitlement, Jack remarked, scribbling notes. But the management's response is the real story here. Instead of enforcing their own rules, they tried to lease your property and then threatened you when you refused. Don't forget the false zoning complaint, Dorothy added. Jack looked up sharply. They filed a complaint with the city against you? That could be construed as retaliation. The meeting lasted over 2 hours. By the end, Jack had enough material for what he called a spotlight series on predatory property management. This won't be published until next week, he cautioned. But when it hits, it's going to make waves. The very next morning, a city inspector showed up at Tom's house regarding the zoning complaint. Tom calmly showed him around the property, explained the situation, and provided his documentation of the ongoing dispute. The inspector, a balding man named Frank, shook his head as he reviewed the materials. This is clearly harassment, he said. I'll mark this complaint as unfounded. And between you and me, this isn't the first questionable complaint I've received involving that management company. As Frank was leaving, Linda's blue sedan pulled up across the street. She stayed in her car, watching the inspector drive away before approaching Tom's house. Can we talk? She asked, her usual confidence noticeably diminished. Tom crossed his arms but nodded. I got eviction papers yesterday, Linda said, her voice unsteady. They're claiming I violated my lease by engaging in activities that damaged the apartment's reputation. Tom was surprised. The management company is evicting you? Why? I thought they were supporting you. Linda laughed bitterly. They were using me. Apparently, I'm now a liability. Brooks told me directly that if I caused any more complications, they'd make sure I couldn't rent anywhere in this city again. Tom studied her face, looking for signs of deception. Why are you telling me this? Because Dorothy knocked on my door last night. She told me about your meeting, about the journalist. Linda hesitated. She said if I wanted to fix things, I should tell the truth about what Brooks asked me to do. Which was what, exactly? Tom asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. Linda looked down at her hands. He offered to waive my late fees if I would keep parking in your driveway. He said they needed to pressure you to sell your property to the complex. This was bigger than Tom had imagined. The management company hadn't just been accommodating a difficult tenant, they'd been actively encouraging Linda's behavior as part of a larger scheme. I have proof, Linda added, pulling out her phone. Text messages from Brooks. I'll show them to the journalist if you want. Tom nodded slowly. I think Jack will definitely want to see those. Jack's eyes widened as he scrolled through the text messages on Linda's phone. The evidence was damning. Brooks had not only encouraged Linda to park in Tom's driveway but had specifically instructed her to do so during certain hours when Tom typically used his car. This changes everything, Jack said, looking up from the phone. This isn't just about parking violations anymore. This is deliberate harassment orchestrated by the management company. They were gathered in Tom's living room, Tom, Dorothy, Linda, and Jack. An unlikely alliance formed through shared grievances. Why would they want your property so badly? Jack asked Tom. Location, Dorothy interjected. Tom's house sits at the corner of the block. If they acquired it, they could expand the apartment complex and add at least 20 more units. Tom nodded. They've approached me before about selling, but I always refused. This house means too much to me. Linda looked uncomfortable. I want to apologize, she said quietly. I was wrong to park in your driveway, even if Brooks was pushing me to do it. I should have known better. Tom appreciated the apology but still had questions. Did you really need the parking that badly? Linda sighed. Honestly? At first, yes. I work 2 jobs, and sometimes I'd get home so late that all the street parking would be gone. But after a while, it became, I don't know, a power thing. Brooks made me feel like I was helping put pressure on you, and I went along with it. Well, now you can help us expose them, Jack said, his reporter instincts clearly fired up. Are you willing to go on record with this? Linda hesitated only briefly before nodding. Yes. They're trying to evict me anyway. Might as well go down fighting. The next morning, Tom received an unexpected visitor. It was Alan Brooks himself, looking considerably less polished than during his previous visit. His tie was askew, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the mild temperature. We need to talk, Brooks said urgently. Privately. Tom let him in but left the door open. Whatever you have to say, you can say it here. Brooks glanced nervously around the living room. The management company is prepared to make a significant offer on your property. 3 times the market value. I'm not interested in selling, Tom replied calmly. This situation has gotten out of hand, Brooks continued, ignoring Tom's response. But there's no need for things to get messy. We can resolve this amicably. By messy, do you mean the article Jack is writing about your company's predatory practices? Tom asked. Or the evidence Linda provided showing you orchestrated the parking violations? The color drained from Brooks' face. Linda spoke to you? She showed you our communications? She did, Tom confirmed. Along with the eviction notice you served her when she became inconvenient. Brooks' professional demeanor cracked completely. Look, I was just following orders from the property owners. They're the ones who want your land. I'm just the middleman here. Then perhaps you should tell that to the reporter, Tom suggested. The article runs next week. I'm sure he'd be interested in your perspective. Brooks sank into a chair, his bravado entirely gone. This will ruin me, he muttered, more to himself than to Tom. You did that yourself, Tom replied without sympathy. Now, I believe you're trespassing again. Please leave. As Brooks slunk away, Tom felt a sense of vindication. What had started as a simple parking dispute had exposed corruption that affected dozens of people. Sometimes, standing your ground led to unexpected victories. 1 week later, Jack's exposé hit the front page of the city newspaper. The headline read, "Predatory Property Management: How One Man's Driveway Dispute Uncovered Corporate Corruption." The article detailed the apartment complex's numerous violations, from overselling reserved parking spots to harassing neighboring property owners. The impact was immediate. By that afternoon, Tom's phone was ringing non-stop with calls from other newspapers, local TV stations, and even residents from different apartment complexes managed by the same company. 3 days after the article's publication, Tom received a certified letter. It was from the corporate headquarters of the management company, completely bypassing Brooks. The letter contained a formal apology for the unprofessional and unethical actions of their local management team and an assurance that they were taking immediate steps to address these issues. Dorothy called Tom with the news before he had even finished reading the letter. "You won't believe what's happening," she said excitedly. "They fired Brooks this morning." 2 corporate representatives showed up and escorted him out of the building. "They're holding an emergency meeting with all residents tonight." That evening, Tom decided to attend the meeting as Dorothy's guest. The community room was packed with residents, many of whom nodded respectfully at Tom as he entered. He recognized several faces from the group that had gathered in his kitchen days earlier. The corporate representatives were surprisingly forthcoming. They acknowledged the parking problems, promised immediate reforms, and announced that Linda's eviction notice had been rescinded. They also revealed that they were installing a new parking management system and hiring security to ensure that reserved spots remained available to those who paid for them. After the meeting, Linda approached Tom. "They're giving me a month of free rent as compensation," she said with a small smile. "And they promised not to blacklist me with other rental agencies." "That's good," Tom replied sincerely. "Everyone deserves a second chance." "I learned my lesson," Linda admitted. "About respecting other people's property and not letting others manipulate me. Thank you, in a strange way, for standing up to me." As they talked, Tom realized something remarkable had happened. His simple act of defending his driveway had rippled outward, creating positive change for an entire community. The parking problems that had plagued the apartment residents for years were finally being addressed. Brooks, who had bullied and manipulated tenants, was gone. And Linda had found her own voice in standing up to corporate misconduct. The following Sunday, Tom was surprised to find a group of apartment residents, led by Dorothy, gathered on his front lawn. They presented him with a humorous but heartfelt plaque that read, "Neighborhood Champion, Defender of Driveways and Exposer of Corruption." "We wanted to thank you properly," Dorothy explained as everyone applauded. "Your stubborn refusal to let someone park in your driveway ended up helping all of us." Tom smiled as he accepted the plaque. He had never sought to be a neighborhood hero. He had simply wanted to use his own driveway without interference. But sometimes, the smallest stands against injustice could lead to the biggest changes. As the impromptu celebration continued, Tom noticed that every car was properly parked, none in fire lanes, none in handicapped spots without permits, and definitely none in his driveway. Some lessons, it seemed, were finally learned.